order. Welcome to bienvenue à la réunion numéro 21 du
Welcome to meeting 21 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research.
in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083I and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, June 16th, 2022, we are meeting on the study of research and scientific publication in French. Pour garantir le bon déroulement de la réunion.
In order to guarantee that this meeting operates smoothly, I'd like to start with a few words for witnesses and members. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you. If you're participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon in order to activate your microphone. And please put yourself on mute when you don't have the floor. With respect to interpretation, for those of you on Zoom, you have the choice on the bottom of your screen between floor, English, or French. For those of you in the room, you can use the earpiece and choose the channel that you wish. I'd like to point out that the comments by all members and witnesses must go through the chair.
To speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. J'aimerais maintenant souhaiter la bienvenue à nos témoins.
I'd now like to welcome our witnesses.
Very glad they have joined us, especially tonight. Many of you will have children, and it's a busy night. Happy Halloween, all. From the Consortium Érudit, we have Tanya Niemann, Directrice Générale. From Université du Québec en Outaouais, we have Adèle Elzaïm, Vice-Recteur, Recherche, Création,
Research, Creation, Partnerships, and Internationalization.
5 minutes for your opening statement. And at the 4.5-minute mark, I will hold up this card. It will let you know you have 30 seconds left. We aim to be fair, so you'll have 30 seconds. And with that, I'd like to welcome Madame Niemann. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Madame la Présidente.
Hearing you. Oh, I hear.
Madam Chair? Yes. Could you confirm that the sound tests were conducted and that they worked well for all witnesses? Can you confirm that for me, please?
I will ask our excellent clerk.
Oui, monsieur, je peux confirmer qu'on a...
Yes, I can confirm that we did the sound tests.
Clerk, thank you, Monsieur Blanchet-Joncan. I also see a hand up from Monsieur Lauzon. Monsieur Lauzon, do you have a question? Monsieur Lauzon? I think, Mr. Clerk, we might have lost Mr.
His hand was up from before, Madam Chair. It wasn't from now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, if we could start then, and we will look forward to hearing from Madame Niemann. The floor is yours.
Est-ce qu'on m'entend?
Can you hear me? Well, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you very much for welcoming me here. Alongside the members of the consortium, I would like to say that we're very honored and pleased to be given this opportunity to speak to you on your study. I would like to share 3 important things with the committee from the outset. First of all, as you may know, with Érudit, Canada has a jewel in the crown of digital dissemination for knowledge in the humanities and social sciences in French. For nearly 25 years now, the founding members, the University of Montreal, the University of Quebec at Montreal, and the University of Laval, have been investing in the consortium. That's in addition to significant funding from the Government of Quebec and the Government of Canada from the granting councils. Thanks to this funding and the ability to bring players together in French language research, libraries, among others, in Canada and abroad, Érudit is like a magnificent ship that has wind in its sails. It's a success story that must be highlighted. This project was born in Quebec, and it's a huge Canadian success story today. The platform, érudit.org, is a digital library, and it offers an excellent showcase for some 140,000 articles published by more than 200 Canadian scholarly journals covering disciplines as diverse as criminology, geography, visual arts, history, and health sciences. Érudit.org is an infrastructure, a technology that combines state-of-the-art technology and human expertise. The vast majority of content is delivered at no cost to the reader, so it's accessible to all citizens, scholars, but also to the general public. We're working to make science more easily accessible. The platform is widely used. Some 34 million documents are downloaded on a yearly basis by 5.6 million users. Nearly two-thirds of the downloads come from outside Canada. And that shows that Canadian science is now sought after internationally. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all who support Érudit, all of our collaborators. And I'd also like to thank people who are using the service on a daily basis. Secondly, I'd like to say that Érudit is now on the high seas. That's where we're sailing today, but there are immense challenges to overcome. We need to be in a position to rival mega companies internationally. And this issue has already been raised by the committee. Many of them don't disseminate information in French because it doesn't generate a profit. Without Érudit, science in French would simply not be disseminated, or only a small group would be able to afford to pay for access to it. With Érudit, Canada supports and preserves Canadian scientific heritage and retains control over research produced in our universities and keeps that knowledge on local services. We retain the ability to use this data independently without commercial imperatives and not being at the mercy of private interests. It's an opportunity for us to produce Canadian material. And this can have a direct impact on our society. Thirdly, and in conclusion, I'd like to say that on the high seas where we are sailing today, we are facing very rough seas. We're facing a time of turbulence and change. There are great opportunities out there, but also a number of risks. So we need to have additional and stable funding to continue to weather these storms. This will help us to focus on open access and a non-commercial platform. This will also enable researchers to maximize this will enable us to, as I was saying, value and enhance the value of researchers who lead the journals. And it's important to have this involvement of all stakeholders to weather the storm. We have the example of the S plan from the United States, and that is something that's good news for me. That will help us to build an open and very diverse system. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Madam Chair, you're just on mute there.
Sorry, my apologies all. Thank you so much, Madam Niemann. We are grateful that you're here and thank you for your testimony. And now we'll go to Professor El-Zaim for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, allow me to thank you for the excellent work your committee is doing and for its impact on Canada of tomorrow. On behalf of the University of Quebec in the Outaouais, I assure you of our full collaboration for the future of science and research in Canada. As you know, for decades we have been questioning the place of languages and the French language in scientific research and publication. Colleagues who have appeared before you before me have given you some excellent ideas and shared a great deal of data. For my part, I'd like to invite you to reflect on the reasons why a Francophone researcher conducts his or her research and writes and disseminates the results in English. I'll also be offering some recommendations. To fully understand the issues at stake, we need to ask the following questions. In what language was the researcher trained? These methodologies at the start are very important, and it's important to undertake this in order to obtain funding. They must also read grant applications, and from this comes the language of collaborators and the language of grant writing and research reports and articles. So this is the first step that the researcher must undertake to design the project. A discipline developed in English cannot take hold and flourish in French if it's not fully translated, taught, and disseminated in the second language. Canada has been a pioneer in the development of new terminology and in the dissemination of science and discoveries in both languages. Now, as for my recommendations in this area, Canada must commit to translating new science and research results from here and elsewhere into both official languages of the country. Recommendation number 2, that these translations and terminologies be disseminated freely and globally, especially in Canada and in the international Francophone community. In a country like ours, we expect academics to be bilingual, if not polyglots, but that's not always the case. In an appearance before you, the Vice President of NSERC assured us that French language project proposals are handled appropriately, implying that jury members are able to read and evaluate applications in French. I tend to believe this. It is the definition of bilingualism and the degree of language proficiency to read, understand, and debate in French that's at issue. The rule that we call linguistic laziness, or the economy of effort in language, is well known. We change language to communicate more easily and make the other person more comfortable. And that also applies when it comes to the development and evaluation of research projects. I have 2 more recommendations in this area: that evaluators of project proposals have full command of the language in which the proposal is written and be able to discuss it publicly. And secondly, that Canada, through its research councils, develop measures to reinforce the mastery of French by English-speaking scientists. The publication and dissemination of results also has its mechanisms and obligations in terms of language, and there are a number of questions. Who is the publication intended for? Students? Collaborators? The discipline community? What is their language? Who publishes and how influential is the publishing house or journal? What is the role of indexing and the influence of metrics such as the journal impact factor? Unfortunately, most journals and databases give very little consideration to languages other than English. Researchers wanting to increase their visibility or influence and citation count will resort to the English language, thus feeding this cycle. So 2 recommendations: that Canada, first of all, join with other countries to increase the number of French language journals and monographs to ensure that their dissemination and especially their proper indexing take place. And secondly, that Canada influence the disseminators of large databases by giving equivalent space to French publications when they exist. Scientific research is increasingly internationalized thanks to globalization and because of the resurgence of global issues that challenge researchers and decision makers. However, even global issues have local specificities, and it's important to study and disseminate these issues in local languages. Several countries have learned the hard way. Research published in English or in a foreign language is, in many cases, not understood by the citizens of these countries and their decision makers. That's not the case in Canada, but we do need to have a commitment by our institutions to ensure that.
Can you hear me? Sorry to interrupt. I know our committee will be very glad to hear from you. Thank you for being here to testify. And with that, we are now going to go to our members who are keen to ask you questions. And tonight we begin with Mr. Tucker. Before I turn the floor over, I do want to welcome Member of Parliament Aria to our committee. And I would like to take a moment to thank our clerk, our analysts, and everyone, our interpreters, everyone.
Madam Chair, I find, thank you so much to our witnesses for their presentation tonight, and I appreciate Tanya being here in person. And I get some questions about the work that you guys are doing, and it's interesting. I apologize for not fully fleshing out the research before coming here tonight, but can you tell me a little bit more? Like, you're not a journal, you're not a review, you're a database of reports. Is that correct?
Oui, c'est correct.
Yes, it's a platform and a disseminator, but we don't edit. We work in conjunction with the 200 journals, which are the independent entities that are the journals, do the editing. They have a production contract with Érudit. So what we do is we bring together the content that has been produced independently on our campuses by the various researchers who are directors of these journals in criminology, for example, or sociology, history on the campus at U of T, the U of A, the University in Manitoba, Halifax, across the country. And we come into play at the end of the editing process. Once all of the work has been done, once the articles are ready, we gather them up and we use the content to prepare it so that the machine can process, so it's machine readable. And we put it into the database. We have a strategy to preserve the data, and we send all of this data out to, and we put it into the catalogs at the libraries across the world, in order to increase the opportunity for people to discover these articles using a key or in a certain area. So we also ensure that this comes up in Google research as well.
And just to follow up on that question, then, what would stop you from publishing more and having, be it every piece of work ever research done in French, or if there is maybe some kind of research that is done that is related to the field of French? What's the limiting factors, I guess, would be my question, to have more things on that database?
So we work with social and human sciences. Érudit was founded in Quebec, so it's mainly to find a place where we could collect French language journals to avoid that large publishers buy them and say suddenly this topic is more local to Quebec or Canada and therefore I'm not interested. I'm an international journal, so I won't give you the opportunity to publish. So the idea was to preserve that ability to publish on issues for here, but also that have an impact abroad. And it's not limited to French. There's also English-Canadian journals. Érudit houses French language content because The members are Quebec-based universities. They're the ones that founded Érudit, but now it's available in both languages. Now, there's a majority of content in French, but a lot of English language content has been added thanks to cooperation with various libraries, universities, and other English language journals. What prevents us from expanding even beyond what we have and faster is our capacity. It's a project that's funded with research budgets, research funds that are strained as is. The funding structure is really complex with various sources of funding. So we're a not-for-profit, and we are dependent on the support of universities. We work in partnerships, mainly. Developing partnerships is important, but it also is time-consuming. So for the time being, we're operating at full capacity with our current funding and with the funds that we get.
In the last 6 years, has it increased, decreased, or stayed flat, the monies received from federal programming?
It has increased because we really worked very hard on that, and we tried to make good progress and show it to the funding agencies. So we were successful in the grant applications, but during the last 3 or 4 years, every year I did a major grant application with my team to work on this success and to get more grant money.
And quickly on you said that 2/3 of the people that are downloading articles are overseas. Where in the world, roughly, would the majority of those 2/3 be? Is it French-speaking countries, I'm assuming?
Mm-hmm. It's not only French-speaking, no. I realize I switched to English. Okay, so it's in France. After Canada, it's France. And then it's the US. And then it's countries like Germany, where we have heavy research countries. And then it's other countries from the Francophonie, mainly Belgique, Cameroon, and Algeria, and so on.
Okay. Wonderful. I think we're out of time here. Thank you so much for the presentation. The Conservatives are going to take the first round on all the panels, but the additional panel rounds will go to the block, by the way, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tucker. You're always so gracious. Thank you, Mr. Tucker. And with that, we will go to Ms. Bradford for 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you to both of our witnesses this evening. Ms. Neiman, you studied in Germany, is that correct? Okay. Can you tell the committee about your experiences or your observations of publishing research in a language other than English internationally?
Yeah, thank you. Is it on? Or? Yeah.
It's on.
Yes.
Thank you for the question. There is a heavy tendency of publishing in English for, I think, everybody working in universities and in the academic sector, because there's this predominance of English as the lingua franca in science. Nonetheless, we have a lot of colleagues in Europe, for instance, who are working in the same not-for-profit publishing endeavors as us. And there is more and more the wish to continue to have these venues where we can publish in multilingual ways and publish about national topics, regional topics, local topics in the language where we live and where we experience these, science or these questions that we have about the society. So there are tendency around the world, actually, where we more and more try to preserve this publishing venues where we can publish in different languages. But still, it's mainly in humanities and social sciences because the STEM sector is so much dominant in English.
Thank you very much. Now, during our last meeting, Mark Fortin, the Vice President of Research Grants and Scholarship Directorate at the National Sciences and Engineering Research Council, told the committee that on average only 10% of the applications received are in French. Do you have any thoughts on why the number of applications are so low? And do you have suggestions that would help increase the number of researchers applying for federal funding in French?
Je vous dirais que
I would answer to that I'm not familiar with those numbers. It wasn't the social sciences and human sciences that were the subject of that comment. I'm not sure it's the same in our field. However, I think we just need to be more successful in our grant applications. It seems that you feel that you'll be more successful if you present an application in English because there's a broader pool of reviewers. So in order to improve the chances of success, people tend to draft them in English. And in our applications to the Government of Canada, for instance, we ask ourselves, are our chances higher if we apply in English or French? And what are the capacities amongst the external reviewers if we submit in French?
That I did have the honor last week of attending the NSERC prizes for 2022. It was over at the Museum of Nature, which I'd encourage everyone to go to if you haven't been there. It's an amazing facility. Anyway, what I wanted to point out, pretty much all of the presenters were done in French. There was no translation. And these researchers were not just all from Francophone universities. There was U of T, there was the Metropolitan University, U of W. So anyway, I found that quite interesting that the presentations were primarily done in French. Now, we have heard contradictory information about access to funding for French researchers. Some witnesses have said that post-secondary institutions do not sufficiently support French researchers. Some say there's a lack of funding, and others say that funding is available, but the researchers aren't applying for it. Can you give the committee your thoughts on where the challenges lie and what you think can be done to support French research in Canada?
I believe that if we dedicate more resources specifically actually to French publication and support this more than the usual way, we can increase the attractivity of publishing and submitting these requests in French. The costs may sometimes be higher for journals when it comes to journal publishing. So the space where I work in, I know that there are additional fees, for instance, for translations. Sometimes journals are attracting manuscripts in English, and then they translate these in order to publish like their original research in their journal and to make it an attractive journal and to have good applications. They need to do so, but these are additional funds, additional costs, which they really need to decide to spend or not to spend on these things.
So one question for Mr. Zaim, and I'm sure my time's almost running out. The committee's heard that testimony that certain areas of study, including science, engineering, and mathematics, are less likely to be offered as Francophone post-secondary programs or have research published in French, and Tanya's alluded to that. Are certain academic disciplines more represented in Francophone research publications than others, Mr. Ziem? Yeah, I'm getting the word here. Quickly.
Madame la Présidente, si vous permettez.
Thank you very much for the question. Obviously, some disciplines are more represented in some languages. Historically, there have been a lot of studies on that issue. However, that's not the only reason why English dominates.
Any more time, or am I over, Ms. Duncan?
Thank you so much, Ms. Bradford. That takes you to your 6 minutes. Thank you for the questions. Thank you to our witnesses. And with that, we will go to Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, I want to thank our guests for being here. The first question would be for Mr. Zaim. I'm really happy to see you here, even virtually. We had been very happy to see you last time we met. And I remember you saying that it was really important to protect French, especially in research. And you mentioned some recommendations in your presentation. You said that some or all, in fact, Canadian research could be translated in both languages. A lot of people came to this committee and said that that might be an avenue, but some people had doubts and fears, in fact, that translating scientific research, especially in social and human sciences, when you conduct research and you do it in a language, you're not just using words. There's a whole culture behind the language, and they're concerned that that wouldn't come through in translation. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Through you, many countries have done a lot to translate all of the knowledge available in their country, because those countries realized that it was really important to their citizens, their students, and their researchers to have access to translation. Even countries have translated old, ancient books, for instance, Russian, Chinese, and German philosophers that have been translated in other languages such as Arabic, my own mother tongue. And many countries spend colossal amounts of money for translation. It is possible to translate this information. It requires a lot of effort. For instance, that entails coming up with terminology. And I would remind you that Canada and Quebec are spearheading a lot of efforts to develop terminology. We've provided solutions in English and French to the entire world, and we could continue in the same vein. It requires a lot of investment, and of course, some concepts are different, but when you translate a German philosopher in French, it's done in a professional way. We not only transfer terminology, but also we find a way to localize the culture. Thank you, Mr. Zaim. So if I understand you correctly, would sufficient funding from the Government of Canada be dependent on the fact that the research, now of course the journals would be largely translated into English or into French? That's my personal position, but yes, I think everything should be translated into French. And you recommended that we improve the number of journals, scientific journals. If you cast your mind back to the last 60 years, there's only 8% of content in French in journals, in scientific journals. What can we do to change that? I suggest that we publish translations, but not only that, I think that we need to provide funding to research institutions and researchers so that these publications are translated or even drafted in the second language, or in our case, in French. And I would even underscore that the translation and publication of original French language product in English is also important. We want to develop French, but we also want reviewers and researchers, English Canadian researchers and reviewers, access the knowledge products in French. So that doesn't happen overnight. It has to be funded. For instance, Érudit is a great example of that. Mr. Zaim, we heard witnesses recently who told us that the applications for grants in French are lower. There's fewer of them than applications in English. So that poses a lot of questions. And I'd like to know, from your point of view, you've certainly had to apply for grants in English, or you know people who have. Should the Government of Canada find a way to reverse that trend? Should there not be a way to fund French language research through the Government of Canada's grants? What we need to do is comfort the researchers and let them know that their grant applications will be analyzed thoroughly and assessed appropriately. For instance, yesterday, NSERC reassured us that that was the case. Sometimes there are obvious matters. For instance, if I learned AI in English, to try and draft a grant proposal in French might be challenging. And that's why one of my first recommendations was teaching in French in our Canadian universities. Yesterday, I took a look at an AI expert in Canada's biography, and I can tell you, and his bibliography, 90% was was in English, although this person is French and even a polyglot and lives in a French community. So what I'm understanding from that, Mr. Zaim, is that to find solutions, I'd like to have your point of view. Should there be incentives in the grant applications? Should we give points to researchers, for instance, that present a grant application? Sorry, Mr. Blanchet?
Response there. Short question.
J'ai entendu oui, Madame la Présidente, dans la question.
I heard yes in answer to my question, Madam Chair. Yes.
Je vais prendre une réponse écrite si Monsieur Zaim.
Then I'll take a written response if Mr. Zaim wants to add anything. But I'm satisfied with his short answer.
Thank you so much, Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca. And now we will go to Mr. Cannings, please. Mr. Cannings, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thanks to the witnesses for being with us this evening. I'll start with Ms. Neiman. Just to get a clarification, I think you were cut off at the very end of your presentation. You mentioned something very briefly that I have no idea about, and that is I think you said the S plan from the United States, and just went on to something else, and it seemed important, so I'm just giving you some time to expand on that.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Oui.
Thank you very much. Yes, it is really important. These are political movements. These are also policy guidelines that governments adopt and that foster open access research. In Europe, the S Plan has been developed by the S Coalition that enables governments that are part of the group to provide open access research, and it entails technical information that all researchers have to comply with. So it's an overall framework that prescribes open access research in order to increase its discoverability and to make sure that science is made more available and to counter the problem we have with large commercial publishers. So in the U.S., to answer your second question, the White House has also published a directive that has told all federal agencies that over the coming years, they'll have to implement plans that dictate open access for research that's funded by the government.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to turn now to Dr. El Zaim and just to get some clarification. These are things I think that Mr. Blanchet-Jonca was talking about. You mentioned your first two recommendations were Canada must commit to translation, I assume, of research documents, and that the translations should be disseminated freely. Just wondering if you could comment on the practicality of that with copyright issues, with costs, if it's done freely. You know, is this going to be restricted to materials that are coming from open access journals, or will it also include the standard journals of science, for instance, that where there's going to be a copyright cost, but there's also going to be, I think, a considerable cost to translate. And maybe you could comment on, say, a guesstimate of a standard research paper, how much it would cost to translate that.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you very much for the question. I haven't done any type of business plan for a national project like this. I've rather used the experience in other countries and of other organizations who do this type of publication. We do have the Translation Bureau in Canada who could do a feasibility study, perhaps, but we know that we're talking here about publishing most documents, but also what about the ones that we need? For example, there might be higher needs for certain articles, articles on AI, for example, that they're mostly all written in English, so we could have them translated towards French, vice versa. I'm not talking about a project of $100,000 here. It's a project. And it's not a project for just 1 year either. This is a life project. It's a forever project that we should keep doing as a country. It's a continual process.
How much time do I have, Madam Chair?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Oh, good.
A minute and a half.
Okay, lots of time.
Minute and a half.
I guess I would just like to, maybe staying with Dr. El-Zaim, perhaps, we've heard various witnesses through this study talk about the concept of impact factor when evaluating research, when evaluating, grant applications. I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that are. Where is that changing? We've heard from some that there might be a movement away from, say, the citation indexes for impact factors. So I just wanted to give you some time to discuss that whole part of this conundrum. How do we evaluate research
Merci.
Without that?
Merci.
Thank you very much. Currently, the impact factors, yes, it is quite a controversial issue. There's many are contested, especially if we're talking about impact factors for research, whereas it's about sharing an article and the number of citations. We're talking about dissemination here. In research, we need to evaluate the true impact of its publication in society, its true impact on innovation in society, in a country. Right now, if we're measuring the impact, we're measuring impact of distribution and not of content. So yes, there are movements to go further than this. They are national and international movements. DORA is an example. I'm sure you've heard about this in other meetings.
Mr. Cannings, again, thank you to our witnesses for all your answers and your testimony. We're now going to go to the second round for 5 minutes, and the Conservative Party has graciously given their time to the bloc. So we will be hearing from Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask a question of Dr. El-Zaim. In your opening remarks, you spoke about the fact that there would be an option for Canada to promote French language scientific publications on the international level. Do you think that right now Canada is a leader in dissemination of French language material? Could we not exchange more with the 300 million people who speak French throughout the world? Thank you very much, Madam Chair. With your authorization, I'd like to answer this question. Yes, absolutely. Canada has shown leadership, but this leadership must be stronger. The Francophone and non-Francophone international community is very interested in what Canada is doing. They are turning to Canada and asking for more collaboration. I'd go even further and say that we have a role to play to save, if I'll allow myself to use that word, to save the French language in certain countries, because there's competition everywhere, and there are Francophone countries that are becoming more and more Anglophone. I was in Morocco recently, and I visited more English language universities than French language universities. People were speaking to me in English more than in French. I have nothing against English. In fact, I wish that everybody spoke several languages. I wish for a world of polyglots. However, it does hurt me to see that the French language seems to be getting weaker and even disappearing. So yes, Canada and Quebec and all the provinces, we all have a role to play, a role of leadership in the French and preserving French language throughout the world. I would say we even need to retake the position we used to have in francophonie. Thank you very much. I'd like to add to this and say that Quebec and Canada, yes, we have the International Agency of French Language Universities. There's more than 80 countries that are part of this organization for French language universities. I'd like to ask another question right now. Ms. Niemann, we're very pleased to have you in person here. Yes, we know that more and more research journals are being published in English, more and more. I've already said that journals created since the 60s, only 8% of these are in French, 17% are bilingual. It's a difficult context for the French language. So how can your platform, Érudit, how can you succeed in this type of difficult environment? Thank you. Thank you for your question. We are a platform that has a 25-year history now, and we've grown every year throughout our existence. With our current capacity, we are adding 20, 25, sometimes up to 30 titles a year. These titles, very few are only in French. They tend to be bilingual titles, or even publications that publish solely in English. We're not quite saturated, if you will. Our services are very much in demand. We offer services to the research community, and all the time new journals are being created. Some journals want to come back on a theme that had been left behind, and this allows them to reconnect with different research communities on an international level. It allows them to build networks. So these are research communities that are built thanks to these publications. This always happens throughout. This type of dynamic research network is thanks to journals. So that is why we wish to continue building the Francophone content, yes, but in collaboration with English content, both together, so that all of this can not be in silo, but be integrated in international networks. It is very important for platforms to collaborate and work together on an international level and with other publications that publish not only in English, but other languages. So we can talk about colleagues in France, in Latin America, in South America as well, where there's a very strong trend of publishing in non-commercial type journals. I'm sorry, Ms. Niemann, we don't have a lot of time. I'd like to ask another question. We know that free access is very important, especially for science in French. We've had Ms. Annie Pilote speak to us at our last meeting. So do you think that the federal government currently is doing sufficiently, is doing enough when it comes to access to data in journals, especially French language journals? Well, I think that there's still a lot of work to be done. We need to think about this issue more globally. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Monsieur Blanchette-Jonca would ask that that answer be provided in writing.
Oui, Madame Niemann, si vous pouvez.
Yes, Ms. Niemann, please. If you could give us that answer in writing, that would be great, but I'll be able to ask more questions later.
Thank you so much to both of you. And we will now go to Mr. Collins for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and welcome to our witnesses here this evening. Madam Niemann, can I ask, I was very intrigued by the, I guess, the stakeholders that you have participating in funding the digital library. Could you share with us how the funding component breaks down on an annual basis in terms of you receive federal support, you made that very clear, and it's increased over the years. Provincially and either from the university sector, could you share with us the revenues that feed into the digital library and how that's funded on an annual basis?
Oui, bien sûr. Donc, Érudit a un budget.
Absolutely. Érudit has a budget of $4.3 million annually, more or less, and 18% of this revenue comes from universities, so the universities who founded Érudit. When they, for example, they host my team of 40 people in the University of Montreal. So we work there on their premises. So it's that type of contribution, an in-kind contribution, if you will. Then Quebec funds $500 million per year. This has been increased recently, 500,000 rather, and then we have about $1.4 million that comes from revenue that is generated with the libraries. It comes from the federal government and other organizations.
I think in your opening you mentioned that, in a perfect world, stable funding is required in order to, I guess, allow you to function at an optimum level. And I know the not-for-profit sector, having worked with them for many years as a former city councillor, it is a very competitive environment in terms of trying to secure government grants and support. When you reference stable funding, what do you have in mind when you mention that to us?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. I think it's really important to have a national plan for open science and open access. And what is attached to this, excusez-moi, je retourne en français.
I'm sorry, I'll switch to French now. What needs to be linked to such a plan? Well, the funding programs and grants need to be linked to what is happening in university libraries so that they don't need to pay large commercial editors. So we need to work with universities more to do the editing of journals and to be able to support these publications from A to Z. It needs to be horizontal and vertical, this support, in order to stop being at the mercy of these large commercial companies and editors. So we need to think of a horizon for public funding for scientific journals, and it needs to be reattached to an open science plan. Other countries have done similar things, and we need to do this while thinking of digital infrastructure, because everything that we do is related to technology. So we're talking about open data. It's human knowledge here that needs to be preserved for the longer term, not just preserve thanks to 2-year grants. This needs to be more perennial, and we need to invest in humans in order to have long-term benefits and to have more capacity for the future. It is important for policies and programs to be aligned, because otherwise it's very difficult from an operational level to go to the next step of development and to innovate without the stability. We need to be able to do this to compete with other large players.
Have left? Madam Chair? How much time do I have left?
You have 40 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Very quickly then to Professor Al-Zaim. We've heard from multiple witnesses that all stakeholders need to play a role in encouraging and increasing the amount of French research publications in Canada. In your recommendations to us in your opening statement, you mentioned quite clearly what you expect from the federal government. Can I ask what role do post-secondary institutions in the province play in the recommendations that you provided to us earlier this evening? And I'll take that in a written form if I could, Madam Chair, because I think I'm out of time at this point.
Thank you so much, Mr. Collins. Yes, it's out of time, and we'll have that answer, if we may, in writing. Thank you so much to you both, to you all. We will now go to Monsieur Blanchet-Jonquière for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll ask a quick question of Ms. Niemann, and then I'd like to speak about my motions. Ms. Niemann, to continue this discussion, I was speaking about Ms. Pilote, who was us, to tell us about how we need to encourage the federal government to support publications and scientific journals with internet access, for example. So I'd like to have your point of view with Érudit. And with investment in this free access, what is your opinion on this? Could this help dissemination of French language research in Canada and throughout the world? Well, thank you very much for the question. Yes, I am absolutely in agreement with this type of recommendation for dissemination, open access. This is what I do every day. It's my wheelhouse. So we think that we are very lucky to have these contributions from the Government of Quebec and the Government of Canada. We already have funding coming. However, if we need to expand and go further and have a bigger impact, and I think we've all seen it here today, we know that we need to work on this issue. Well, we need to work together even more in order to deploy free access and open science. So yes, we need measures for journals, and we need to have more grants to allow these to transition towards free access. And it's changing economic models that we've had in the past, so it's difficult. Nobody's against free access, but somebody needs to fund it. The transition needs to happen in order to support this open access. So we need to invest in this. Last question for you. Does the federal government funding, should it be conditional to research being published in both official languages and be available through open access in both languages? I would agree with that proposal, yes. We need to find the means to do so. So, thank you very much. I now have some motions. Now, my first motion I tabled last week. That the deadline for the submission of briefs in relation to the study of research and scientific publication in French be extended to 5 p.m. on Thursday, November 24th, 2022. I'll give a bit of context to my colleagues. You will know that, sadly, we've had a cancellation of a committee sitting last week, and it was the deadline for submission, so this means we have more time in committee now. It's extended the date, so I'm simply asking for an extension for the submission of briefs so that witnesses can have an extension as well. That is, that they'd have 10 days after the end of the study, and I've calculated, and that date is November 24th, 2022, and I hope to have your cooperation in this.
Thank you so much, Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca. Is there any discussion or hands up among the committee? I see Ms. Diab. Ms. Diab?
Moi, je pense que c'est une bonne.
I simply want to say I think it's a great idea.
Do we have agreement amongst the committee?
Yes, for me, Stéphane.
Yes.
Thank you.
We.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, there's agreement amongst the committee then? Thank you so much, committee. And Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca, I believe you said there was a second one?
Oui, donc une autre.
Yes, absolutely. There is another motion here, and I've had the opportunity to distribute it here to the members that are present in person. So I'd like to read it, and then the clerk can send it to those of you who are with us virtually. That the committee invites the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, François-Philippe Champagne, to testify as part of the study on research and scientific publication in French during one of the meetings of the committee to be held during the month of November. So I'm now to give a bit of context. Again, I've already asked that the minister testify here in the committee. The minister unfortunately refused to come. We didn't get any explanation. Perhaps he's too busy to come. However, I would like to give him the opportunity to come. I'm quite busy, as you know, with this study, and we're talking about modernizing the Official Languages Act. So we're all busy, and the federal government does recognize that the French language is declining. So yes, I would like to have the minister be here to speak before the committee, so he can give us his opinion and his ideas, and to tell us, and we can see how we can help him as well in order to improve the position of the French language in research and scientific publications in French in Canada. So once again, I hope to have your collaboration to invite the minister.
Thank you so much, Mr. Blanchet-Jonca. I believe we have Mr. Collins and then Mr. Lauzon.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think it's a reasonable request. I would just ask if there's an opportunity to add it. Maybe we invite the minister to the moonshot study, which is next, and then we allow questions on the research study that we're undertaking now, and sort of two birds with one stone, so to speak. So I'm certainly supportive of that, but I think we move on from this study, start the next one, invite the minister, and then he's there for both, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Mr. Collins. Then I'll go to Mr. Lauzon.
Oui, merci.
Well, thank you. Now, we don't know why the minister declined the invitation. Perhaps his schedule was busy, but I like what Chad proposed. But we're reaching the end of the study, despite the fact that we've extended the time. That would enable us to start the next study. And perhaps, maybe, I mean, I don't have the minister's schedule in front of me, but maybe he would be available, and then we could kill two birds with one stone, as was said. He could take questions on the next study, and we could keep the door open for some questions dealing with this study. We could put the two together so that we could hear from him on both. Thank you, Mr. Lauzon.
Ask the clerk if there are further hands. Oh, I see Mr. Tucker's hand is up.
Yes, Madam Chair. This study is important on its own to have the minister, and I think the next study is also just as equally as important. So I would encourage that we should have the minister in on this study before it concludes. And I think the month of November is pretty broad enough to find an evening on a Monday night in the next 5 weeks to come down.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Is there any further discussion, colleagues?
Oui, Madame la Présidente, je vais y aller.
Yes, I think you didn't see my hand up, Madam Chair. I'd just like to make sure with Mr. Collins that the fact that we would include the minister as part of the next study of the committee, well, I don't know how we would split the time, because I'd really like to have some time so that we can hear the minister on the issue of scientific research in French. So I'm open to that suggestion of having him appear on the next study as part of the next study, but without compromising the amount of time that we would have to address questions that we have under this study. Thank you, Mr. Blanchet-Jonca.
Help me. I don't have the list. It looks like Monsieur Lauzon has his hand up. Monsieur Lauzon.
Non, désolé, Madame la Présidente.
No, sorry, it was an old hand.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? I'm hearing a split here, colleagues. We're going to have to come to some agreement here. Is the discussion finished on this? Oh, I see Mr. Collins' hand is up, please.
Yeah, can I just ask through you, Madam Chair, to the clerk, when's our last meeting on this one here tonight, on the French research study?
Right now we have it scheduled for our next meeting, November 14th.
Okay. So if we held our next meeting, then after that is the 21st. So is that too late to, I mean, it falls within the time frame that Maxime suggested in terms of the month of November. If we did the 21st, we're getting out of this one, getting into the new one. I guess it just means, you know, what's the minister's availability on that day if he can make the 21st? And I don't know his schedule, so it's anyone's guess at this point, but I think that's the easiest path forward in terms of accommodating both studies. The minister's in on the 21st. We're not leaving it too late, so we're out of this, you know, by a couple of weeks. We're actually there the first meeting after this study concludes, and we're on the first day for the next study. So I don't think that the 21st is unreasonable in terms of that being the committee's request.
I'll just add quickly that we will likely have a first panel of witnesses for the moonshot study on the 14th in the last hour. That's as it's currently set. That can be changed, of course.
But. Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Thank you to our clerk. Is there any further discussion?
Oui, Madame la Présidente, donc juste me...
Yes, I just want to make sure, Madam Chair, that we can have the minister for 2 hours and 1 hour for the study of science and research in French and an hour on the next study.
From our committee. Mr. Clerk, no hands up. Is there agreement for what we have heard from Monsieur Blanchette-Joncat, or does this need to be put to a vote?
Tout est bien, Madame la Présidente.
It's all good, Madam Chair.
Agreement from the committee? I see some nodding. Mr. Clerk, can you help me? Oh, Monsieur Lauzon, do you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Okay, Monsieur Lauzon.
Now this time, this is a real end. Peut-être.
Well, perhaps we could ask for a change to the motion, a modification, an amendment, so that we could all vote on the same thing. We could ask the clerk, perhaps, to change the wording of the motion and to add that so that the motion indicates that we would be having 1 hour on each subject. And I don't know the exact wording, but we could vote on that and have the minister for 1 hour on each subject.
Okay, so that could be moved as a formal amendment. I hesitate to make any of my own changes in the wording without having it submitted to me in writing, because that will be a formal motion. So.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Okay, we've heard from Monsieur Lauzon. Is there agreement from the committee? And I'll have to look to our clerk.
I just want to make sure that we're clear that if Mr. Lauzon is moving an amendment or not to that, and whether it needs to be discussed.
And Monsieur Lauzon, could you please repeat what you have brought forward so that the committee understands exactly what is being brought forward?
Oui.
Yes, I could. It would be that the committee invite the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, François-Philippe Champagne, to testify as part of the study on research and scientific publication in French for 1 hour, and the second hour would be dedicated to the next study.
Everyone, clerk, is everyone in the committee clear on this?
Madame la Présidente, juste clarifier là.
I would just like to clarify as of the 21st of November, based on what Mr. Collins said.
With the clerk, because I believe invitations have gone out for the second study, so we'll have to check with our clerk, please.
Invitations have gone out, but whatever the committee decides in a motion is doable. If it's adopted, we move things around.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Okay, so Mr. Clerk, would you like to read back what the committee is considering, and we'll see if they're comfortable with it, please.
Okay, so doing my best to change it into, I'll read it in English. So that the committee invite the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, François-Philippe Champagne, to testify as part of the study on research and scientific publication in French for 1 hour during one of the meetings of the committee to be held during the month of November, and then for another hour on the International Moonshots Program study. To that effect.
Thank you so much to our clerk. Does the committee understand what's being brought forward? And we'll look for agreement amongst the committee. Is there further discussion?
Mais il y avait Maxime Blanchet.
Maxime Blanchet-Jonca had made some changes. Well, yes, Madam Chair, I wanted to say as of November 21st. So if the minister can appear on the 14th, well, we won't have started the next study yet. So that would be, we're dependent on the minister's schedule, of course, but I think that the best way of saying this or wording it would be that we would be inviting him on the 21st or the 28th. So as of the 21st of November for the minister.
Monsieur Lauzon, are you comfortable with what Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca has suggested?
Yes, of course. Maintenant, l'amendement.
So then the amendment is from Maxime.
As an amendment from Maxime Blanchet-Jonca.
Yeah, so au lieu de dire dans le mois de novembre, on pourrait dire.
So instead of saying during the month of November, we would say then as of November 21st. And we'll put to that the sub-amendment comes from from Maxime.
Thank you, everyone. And is there agreement amongst the committee on this? I see some hands up. And Mr. Clerk, are you able to confirm if there's agreement, please?
Yes, there appears to be agreement.
Thank you. That's terrific. Thank you, Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca. It is now my job to thank our witnesses. We thank you for your time, your effort, your expertise. We hope it's been a good experience for you, and we hope that you will consider coming back and seeing us again. And committee, with that, we're going to suspend briefly so we can set up our second panel. Suspended. welcome back to the committee. We are on our second panel tonight, and I'd like to welcome our witnesses and for being so gracious. This panel goes until 8:30 tonight. J'aimerais faire quelques observations.
I'd like to make a few observations before we begin. Before you speak, please wait for me to call your name. If you're participating by video conference, please click on the microphone icon to activate your microphone. Please put yourself on mute when not speaking. As regards interpretation, for those on Zoom, you have a choice on the bottom of your screen between the floor, English, or French. For those of you who are in the room, you can use the earpiece and to choose the desired channel. I remind you that all comments from members and witnesses should be directed to the chair. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses for the second panel.
Welcome our second panel tonight. À titre personnel, we have Janice Bailey, Directrice Scientifique Nature et
Janice Bailey, Scientific Director, Nature and Technologies Research Fund of Quebec. And Yves Gingras, Professor of History and Sociology of Science from the University of Quebec at Montreal.
5 minutes to present. At the 4.5-minute mark, I will hold up this card and it will let you know that you have 30 seconds left. We aim to be fair. Once again, a warm welcome to our witnesses, and we'll begin with Janice Bailey, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I've chosen to speak in English, although I thought I was going to be speaking in French, but when I did my homework, I realized that most of the members of the committee have a preference for English, but I'm certainly functional in both languages. So my name is Janice Bailey, and as mentioned, I'm the scientific director of the Fonds de Recherche de Québec en Nature et Technologie, or the FRQNT, which is one of 3 government organizations supporting and promoting research in Quebec. Before taking this position in 2019, I was a professor researcher at Laval University for 25 years, specializing in the field of reproduction. So I worked on animals, humans, the effects of the environment on the health of future generations. And I speak today at this consultation on my own behalf. I'm from Brandon, Manitoba. I'm Anglophone. I started my research career in English at the University of Manitoba and continued through the universities of Guelph and of the Pennsylvania School of Medicine in Philadelphia. I developed my expertise, my reputation as an expert, and my network of contacts in an English-speaking world. But I was offered a position as a professor at Laval University in 1994. Thus, my husband, who is also a researcher and Anglophone from Southern Ontario, and I decided to continue our adventure in the scientific community in French, and we headed to Quebec. It was difficult because neither I nor my husband spoke French very well at the time, but it paid off in the end, and it has provided us, this bilingualism has provided us, actually this ability to speak French has provided us a tremendous access to rich scientific communities and networks, which has considerably broadened our professional opportunities. I would not be in this chair today if I did not speak French. We have conducted research projects in both languages, disseminated our knowledge in both languages, and established valuable collaborations in Quebec, Canada, and elsewhere in the world in English and in French. And although we speak English at home, our days are in French, and our son, who is now adult, studied in French in high school, cégep, and university. We really believe in the importance of French. This openness to French has also allowed me to see that research knowledge is partly invisible if it's only in English. The English language is certainly the first language of science in the world, but it is essential to have access to scientific knowledge produced in other languages. In Canada, we have French, of course, but we also have Indigenous languages. We must not or cannot really fight science in English, and that's not my point, but we need to promote it better in French, including research and publications in French. Science is conducted for the well-being and progress of society. Science in French or in any other language is just as important as science in English. Restricting science to a single language drastically limits its accessibility. And as a professor, for those 25 years, I taught French and regularly conducted public outreach activities in French, often with my graduate students. Access to knowledge produced in different languages is particularly important in areas such as natural sciences, and I emphasize that access to Indigenous vocabulary and traditional knowledge should enhance understanding of, for example, biodiversity sciences. The future of the planet is at stake, and languages participate in this knowledge and circulation of knowledge. So this circulation of knowledge in a variety of languages also strengthens public confidence in science and research. The phenomenon of misinformation, however, has grown over the past decade, particularly with the emergence of social media. There we go. Scientific information is one of the victims of this misinformation, and disinformation hinders the link between science and society. It undermines the credibility of scientific information and has consequences for individual or collective decision-making and policies on important issues. Access to quality knowledge in a variety of languages based on robust data developed by science and research should be a societal priority. Personally, I don't really like social media, but I pay attention to it, and the FRQ-NT is very active in promoting research in French. Canada is a rich country, among the richest in the world. We complain, but we are very privileged. And our wealth comes with an obligation to share, especially with lesser privileged countries. Scientific knowledge is part of our wealth that must circulate freely, must be accessible to as many people as possible, access that passes through language. The French-speaking scientific communities of Canada and Quebec should be very proactive and build bridges with the French-speaking scientific communities where the needs are very great. For example,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Merci, Professor Bailey. Merci, Directrice Scientifique. Thank you for being here and for your testimony. There will be lots of questions. And with that, we will go to Professor Gingras pour 5 minutes.
Merci de votre... Thank you for your kind invitation. I suppose I was invited here because I work on the transformation of science and knowledge for over 40 years now. In 1984, I published a first article that explains the sociological value of language in science. And in 1991, the government of Quebec asked us what the place of French was in scientific publications. And I worked with Camille Limoges, who was a deputy minister in Quebec for a long time, and we worked on the use of French language manuals in science classes. After 40 years, the reason why we're still here is because we use general categories that are confusing and are not precise enough. So I'll use the last 3 minutes I have to try and explain things and to ensure that the measures taken by the government are both rational and effective. And I'll show you that it's really easy to have an overbroad vision that doesn't fit reality and doesn't fit science. And we have to stop talking about sciences. That doesn't mean anything. We have to separate natural sciences, social sciences, and human sciences. Why? Because the scientific research body is completely different. From the very beginning of the 1980s, in natural sciences, physics, mathematics, chemistry, the universal language, the go-to language in journals was English. But that cannot be confused or conflated with science as it's taught in French language universities. So on the one hand, you have the market of of journal publications. On the other hand, you've got lab work. For instance, in University of Montreal, in my opinion, lab work has to be done in French. Courses have to be taught in French, and manuals have to be available textbooks have to be available in French. When you discover an electron, it's very specific, and this idea that the population has to access knowledge because they pay for it is absurd. An article on AI will only be understood by a few of you, if any. But that doesn't matter. Why? Because there are publications such as Québec Science that are meant to explain very specific technical knowledge to the layperson. So Québec Science is published in French. It's published by Quebec-based researchers that publish their fundamental work in the language of informatics, that is English. So we have to stop conflating everything and think that translating all scientific journals in both language will have an effect. I'll show you when we have more time that in France, we tried, and I had predicted that it would fail. And 10 years on, they've stopped translating systematically sociology journals, poli-sci journals into English because there's no market. They spent millions of euros because they conflated too many things, math, history, and the rest of it. Math does not operate like history, and that has to be understood. And for French, we have to make sure that the social sciences and the human sciences cannot be seen as more hard sciences. A little bit earlier, we talked about impact. The impact factor is an obsession of natural sciences that has been transposed to social sciences. I wrote an entire book on that issue, and it shows that we try and conflate through this factor the journal and its articles, which are not the same thing. And we think that translating will suddenly make science more visible and more discoverable. I hope that in our questions I'll be able to show you that if we have a problem, we have to first find a problem statement. What are we talking about? Are we talking about open access? Are we talking about the S-Plan in Europe? Are we talking about something else? All of those things create too much confusion. Thank you.
Merci, Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Both of you for being here. We're grateful for your time. You have an eager committee who wants to hear from you. And we will now go to our first round of questions. This will be for 6 minutes, and we will begin. I'm not sure who's starting with the Conservative Party tonight for 6 minutes, please.
Madam Chair, that'll be me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Soroka. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming. I'll start off with Ms. Bailey because you come from quite a unique scenario here where most of us are French speakers and then they got English, but you started the other way around. One of the things that they've talked about in previous witnesses is how French speakers were applying in French language and we're not getting as good a results as well as they would in English researchers applying for applications or grants. Have you noticed this as well? And if you were doing this, were you doing your grants in English or in French?
Thank you for that question. So as a researcher, when I applied to federal funding agencies, I wrote my grants in English. When I applied to French funding agencies, such as the one that I now am at the head of, I wrote my applications always in French.
Just if there was any differences in whether you're getting better applications or better results, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I honestly, I believe that maybe some of the comments that might occur could be anecdotal. Certainly writing scientifically in a language that is not your mother tongue even now after 30 years, it's harder for me to write in French than it is in English, but I do it all the time. It is hard to write, and I think you need some extra help to write in a different language. Certainly people Anglophones writing in French, it's a lot harder, and you need some help to be concise. Scientific writing is ultra concise. Our grant applications are very small, and so you're always asked to keep things trim, and so you need help. I'm not sure if I answered appropriately, but yes, it's hard. From one language to the other, it's hard. And it's hard writing science applications in English for me. Probably in French for people in French.
Well, no, my question was, were you more successful writing in English or in French applications? Because they've said people that write French applications aren't as successful.
Do they really have data that shows that?
That's what they were insinuating, so that's why I'm just wondering if you found that.
In my own experience, I don't see that. It's harder. It takes longer. There's more work to do. I think that people working in French in an Anglophone environment, or in a large, in the Canadian context, we always have to have our CV in French and English. We have to write our research summaries in French and English, so that's a bit of a pain. But I don't know if the success rates are truly different. I've not seen data to suggest that.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Ms. Bailey. I'll go on to Mr. Gingras now. You sort of brought up a completely different aspect that I never even thought of, is with the human and social sciences side of things, that you're saying to publish in French, that makes a lot more sense, but yet in other sciences it doesn't. And you wanted to dwell a bit more on this, so could you please explain more? I'd love to hear more on this.
Yes. In practice, when we talk about science in English, what we're talking about is the natural sciences. And what happened, for example, you just gave the example of grant application. That's, again, a different question. When you apply to SSHRC or NSERC or CIHR, there are, in fact, statistical data by SSHRC that follows up the rate of success for French and Anglophone to be sure that there is no bias like that. So they follow that up because that's a real question for a very simple reason. If you apply in French at SSHRC and they want Canadians to evaluate this, in practice, though most Francophone university professors are bilingual, you cannot say the same of Anglophone university professors who are not bilingual. And in being bilingual, we should again distinguish between reading French, reading English, speaking French, and writing French or English. Okay, I do three of them. But some could read, but don't talk. So we have to be precise. So for your question, SSHRC will give you the number exactly about the rate of success. But the reason it's different is that with the tendency, and that's my view, you ask my view, I give my own view. The tendency of the three organizations, SSHRC should be with NSERC and the three councils are together, it's very nice, but there is a perverse effect to that. To apply the same criteria to social sciences and humanities, because social sciences are what I call in sociology indexical, they are local. When I work on Brother Marie-Victorin about Quebec science, it would be absurd to publish that in English in Australia. First, they won't be interested. Second, the Quebec people won't read on Marie-Victorin. But if I talk on galaxy, there's no Quebec galaxy, there's no Canadian galaxies. Galaxies is universal. So the history of the languages in social sciences and humanities is different from the history of the use of language from English. The problem now we have, and I could give example in French, they think that being international in social sciences is writing in English. I wrote a paper explaining that the statistical analysis shows it's false. They translated for 10 years the Revue Française de Sociologie in English. It had no more citations for a simple reason. If you're an American working on France, you already read French. If you don't read French, it's because you're not working on France. So even if I translate the paper for you, you will not read it, not because it's not good, because it's not your field. So there's a total confusion about all those things.
Professor, I'm sorry to interrupt. I apologize. Mr. Soroka, thank you for your questions. We are now going to go to Ms. Bradford for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you for both of our witnesses for being with us tonight. Fascinating. And I agree with MP Soroka. It's quite fascinating, Ms. Bailey, that you did all your study and everything in English, and you were from Manitoba, yet you've made your career in French. So that's really quite remarkable and commendable. And anyway, I was interested in the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA. It sets out recommendations to improve the ways in which scientific research is evaluated, including moving away from journal-based metrics as a measure of research quality. So Le Fonds de Recherche de Quebec announced in 2020 that they're signatories of DORA, and the committee here has heard testimony to date that an over-reliance on journal publications as an indicator of research quality can penalize researchers publishing in French due to the relatively small number of Francophone journals and the relatively limited audience in comparison to English. So what has the implementation of DORA principles look like at Le Fonds de Recherche de Quebec?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a wonderful question. When we talk about DORA, we tend to talk quite a lot about the impact factor, and Professor Gingras mentioned the importance of, the historical importance of impact factor, particularly to my field in natural sciences, where people will look at different journals and they have different impact factors. And we've tended to use that historically as a sign of research quality. If you publish a paper in Cell, well, it's a good paper, even if you haven't read it. That's what we tend to say. Or if you publish it in the Journal of Growing Carrots, oh, it can't be that interesting because it's only growing carrots. And that's terrible, because the important thing is it's publicly funded research. It's important to get that information out to the community, the scientific community anyways. And I think that impact comes with time. Right. And we've signed the Declaration of San Francisco in 2020. So it's still a culture change that I personally am trying to help our research community adapt. I think that the FRQ-NT, we are small, but we have a large voice. And I think that we could nudge scientific culture a little bit along with others. So what I would really hope, and forgive me, Ms. Bradford, if I'm not answering perfectly well your question, but right now, I think that the important message is that the research is published in peer-reviewed journals, and that information is accessible as widely as possible. That's what's important, not necessarily in which journal you publish.
Pat, do you think the implementation of DORA principles will have on the funding and publication of research in French?
I think that it could be a positive change because, for instance, I still have a couple of students that are hanging around, okay? And I would really like to see and encourage them to publish in French. I think that students sometimes in Francophone universities who themselves are Francophone might be slow to publish in English. It's very daunting for them sometimes to send out that last article in English. But if I could say, well, publish it in French, write it in French, you've got it for your thesis. I think that students might be a lot more, and their professors would be a lot more open to letting them, or to submitting and publishing in French and sharing their information in French. I really appreciated what Professor Gingras said about perhaps just translating everything that's already published in English and French is maybe not useful, but that doesn't mean that something that would be published, a fundamental piece of research that would be published in French wouldn't be useful. So I think that would be very interesting, especially review articles, which is a phenomenon in natural sciences, which are very, very useful. And I think that there's a huge space. In fact, I thought I would love if Quebec, we could have journals with review articles that we could write collectively with, around the world. And I think these kinds of journals would be so helpful to Francophone nations. These people I visited Mali, they don't speak English. they don't have access to English literature anyway, so it doesn't matter. They don't have very much access to anything. And I think that if we could have these reviews or journals that would be have these review articles in French, that would be such a great resource. And those articles are maybe easier to read by the general public or the highly educated public, as opposed to a fundamental research paper that can be very difficult, as Professor Gingras rightly said.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions for you, Professor Gingras. The committee's heard testimony that certain areas of study, including science, engineering, and math, are less likely to be offered as Francophone post-secondary programs or have research published in French. Are there certain academic disciplines more represented in Francophone research publications than others?
Of course, if you are, again, take the French case, okay? In France, there is a journal since the 19th century called Journal de Physique. That's a physics journal. The title of the journal is in French, but there's essentially no paper in French in it. It's because the lingua franca, the lingua franca in the 17th century was Latin. Newton wrote his book not in English, in Latin. Okay. Descartes also wrote some of his work. So we have to take care about an abstract view of the world and a practical view of in mathematics. There are very few words. If then you have equations. So it's a very basic language that is used. Paper in Nature have 4 pages, not 25 pages, like in sociology or in history.
Professor Gingras, my apologies. Thank you very much, Ms. Bradford. We will now go to Monsieur Blanchet-Chancard for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much. I'd like to salute the witnesses that are joining us for the second hour of the committee. My question will be for Professor Gingras to begin with. Thank you very much for being with us tonight, especially to distinguish between natural sciences and humanities. I know that you've said that we have to talk about publishing in English and then teaching that has to be done in French in Quebec and in Francophone communities outside of Quebec. From what I gather, from what you've said, systematically translating everything, that's not a good solution, correct? Not only is it something that's not done, but if we were to do it like it was done in France, it would be a failure. In sociology, you can't always do experimentations because it's not ethical. However, we have seen it done. France invested millions to translate the sociology journals, saying it's not international enough. They thought, okay, if we translate this in English, it'll become something that's international. Ridiculous. It didn't work. So I've measured the effects of citations during 10 years, and it was almost zero effect. Why? Because, like I've said, if you work in France, you speak French. So the American Journal of Sociology is not an international journal. It's American. 96% of its authors are American. So it's in Quebec, if there's no sociology research that's done, like Sociologie, Société, there's some there's these type of sociology journals for different countries, yes, because the issues are different. But the physics, no, it's an international publication. I'm a member of an American physics journal because physics is international. Electrons are international. So sociology has to be treated differently. So you have to invest in a targeted way. So Polity Press is asking if Polity Press is asking to translate my book towards English, yeah, it might be worth it because there's demand for it. So France in 2017-2018 stopped translating everything because they finally understood what I have measured empirically, that translating everything doesn't make sense from an economical point of view, from a scientific point of view. It's confusing what my father is going to read. He's going to read Québec Science. He's not going to read some AI article that won prizes that he's not going to understand. No, you have to target your financing. Thank you very much, Professor Gingras. So if I understand correctly, in natural sciences, that's one thing. But if we talk about social sciences, there you're saying that translation might make more sense. Now, you've talked about accessibility of manuals in French. So if we publish something in English and then we translate it so that these manuals can be available in French for teaching, for example, in Quebec, I want to know exactly what you are recommending. What would you suggest so that there be more room for research and publication in French, especially in social sciences? Well, in natural sciences, French language is important, yes, for teaching, because in universities, if you think of competition, it's on an international level. So if you hire somebody who's well known, but they don't speak a word of French, there's a letter from a student in the University of Montreal who's studying physics, and she said, I'm in my seminar, in my master's class, and it's being taught in English. I didn't register to McGill. I registered to the University of Montreal, and I'm being taught in English. So that's why I'm saying there's a difference between teaching and publication. If you register to the University of Montreal and your professor doesn't speak a word of French, well, you might as well register to McGill or Concordia. So deans and rectors have to stop saying, oh, we need to compete internationally, but we also need the French language. You can't have your cake and eat it too. So the priorities are, I'm trying to go faster because I know we don't have a lot of time, but we need to say that if you want to be serious about this international competition, is it really important? Does it really mean hiring somebody who only speaks English? Are they really better? It's a little bit colonial thinking to say that it's better if it's said in English, because it's often wrong. Thank you very much, Professor Gingras. You've spoken about content. Now I want to talk about the presence of Francophones, Quebecers in the different research chairs. In the 30s, Mr. Rousseau did some research on this, researched the place of Francophones and Quebecers in science. Do you have data? Do we still have data? Now we're in 2022, about 100 years after that. Should we still worry about the place of Francophones in the world of science? Can Francophones contribute in their mother tongue in science? Well, I've looked into this quite a bit. If you look at the scientific community in Quebec, and if you measure their impact at a macro level, it is about 20% over the world level. So researchers in natural sciences are integrated on the international level, and that's why I published something called The Value of a Language in Science, because we're talking about community. So astrophysicists, if from Quebec, if they're at an international convention, they'll be speaking with Chinese, with people from all over the world in English, in the lingua franca. So the natural sciences issue that's been solved 30 years ago. Now we have to talk about social sciences. Okay, so let's talk about that, about humanities and social sciences. I was looking at the data. So since 1980, there's been French language publications have went down by 25.6%. I'm sorry, Mr. Blanchet.
6 minutes. My apologies. We will now go to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you to the witnesses. This has been very interesting. I'll start with Professor Bailey, just to maybe clarify something. I know Mr. Soroka was mentioning about the success of applications in French, and I just wanted to, I flipped back in my notes to Professor Fortin with the NSERC, who mentioned that 26% of NSERC applicants are Francophones, but only 10% of applications are submitted in French. But he said that the French applications from bilingual universities such as McGill and University of Ottawa had more success than those submitted in English. So there was, it's not as Mr. Soroka was saying, at least in that case. I don't have any, couldn't find anything on general thing, but it seems that the French applications were successful, as successful or more successful in those cases. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on that, about when you are submitting an application or working in a bilingual environment like University of Ottawa or McGill, and you have that community around you that can help you edit in French and things like that. We've heard this from some.
I think that I'm glad that Mr. Fortin provided those data. I know, as Professor Gingras said, that the Tri-Councils follow these data very, very closely. To the best of my knowledge, I've not seen that there's a big discrepancy. The success rates do not seem to be heavily biased by the language of submission. I could be wrong because this is not something that I looked at yesterday. I think the environment, and I think that if you're a scientist and you think very carefully about what language you're going to submit your application in. And if you are going to try and write it in English and you're Francophone, you have someone help you, and vice versa. That's what I've tended to see. I have to say that McGill, in my experience, is much more English. If I don't really consider McGill to be bilingual per se, but I think that most people, many of the applicants from McGill are functional in both French and English.
Right. Yeah, I think we've heard that about McGill as well here. Turning to Professor Fortin, sorry, Gingras. Just one little detail, and I've read a couple of the papers that you've written on this subject, and you mentioned the Matthew effect. Yes. I'm just wondering if you could, it seemed that it was important, but I didn't know what it was. So if you could maybe explain that and how it relates to
Very
this.
simply, it's that the fact that once you have acquired a certain visibility, you will, at equal quality, be given more than, in fact, you have. For example, and I think it's the case for English. I will be very frank. We talk about a rent, okay? You can have a rent on petroleum, like Alberta. You just sit on the rent. There is a linguistic rent that we never talk about. In Quebec, McGill and Concordia have a linguistic rent. We think they are better in the world classification of university. I know very well those rankings. I wrote a lot of stuff on them. It's a linguistic rent, because if you are only Francophone, in the world, they won't see you as much as an Anglophone. So they will say, oh yeah, we know very well McGill or Concordia. What is Université du Québec in Montreal? What's that? So there is a linguistic rent. So the Matthew effect is the same thing. If you, for example, if I write a paper with my student, he signed his name with mine. Since I'm quite known to some extent, they will say, oh, Gingras wrote this paper. I said, no, I wrote it with my student. But they don't care because I will get the credit for it. That's the Matthew effect. And the Matthew effect has also an effect on the impact factor. That's a very important paper we did. We have been able to prove that the impact factor in itself has a Matthew effect. This is why we should forbid the impact factor at NSERC. I asked that for many years. NSERC don't want to do that. It should be forbidden on the committee by a member to say, oh, the impact factor of the journal is higher. It should be forbidden. That's easy to do. It's a criteria that they should do at CIHR, SSHRC. SSHRC, they don't use it, in fact, but NSERC has this mania in biomedical sciences. Mathematicians don't use it much because they know it's garbage.
Well, I come from the biological sciences, so I'm very familiar with
impact factor.
Yes. So just to continue again, just perhaps to get some clarification over your recommendations around the differences between the natural sciences and the social sciences, how your recommendations to this committee and to the government would differ.
If we want to help the diffusion of the social sciences and humanities in Canada, the first thing they have to do is put a basic, stable thing for érudits. Érudits has been created 25 years ago, and I was sitting on the board of SSHRC, by the way, and I saw that English Canadians say, why érudits, do we need that? I said, you don't understand, that's the future. Now they understand it. So this is why it's érudits will be able to absorb the journal in in English also. And as we have shown, most are francophone, some are bilingual, like from New Brunswick and things like that.
Professor Gingras,
érudit is the basis to look at.
I am sorry,
Merci.
I have the worst job. You provide this interesting testimony, both of you, and I have to interrupt. So I feel very badly about this. We're now going to go to the 5-minute round, and I think that will take us to 8:30. So I believe the Conservative Party are giving their time to Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca. So if that's correct, Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca, the floor is yours.
J'y vais, Madame la Présidente, rapidement.
Yes, absolutely. I'll do that quickly, Madam Chair. Mr. Gingras, I'd like you to give us more information on if we should reduce the impact factor when we give funding. Yes, what I said is that the impact factor is not well understood. The article is confused with the journal. So since scientists often don't understand this, I've given conferences throughout the world, and in committees, for example, the impact factor, including the H index, are forbidden. It's different in the Web of Science, in the Google Score and Scopus. It's different everywhere. So in committee, they need to look at resumes and not say, oh, it's an article from this journal or that journal. Like my colleague said, oh, if it's published in Nature, it has to be good. No, there's some things that are published in Nature that are never cited. So it doesn't mean that they're good. So we need to stop using the impact factor in committees. It's easy to do. It's a very easy change to make. Thank you very much. What other indicators should we consider if we want Francophones to be able to do research in their area in humanities and social sciences? Well, it's the same thing. Committees at SSHRC, when they see an article on Indigenous people that is published in Histoire d'Amérique, well, they'll know that it's an excellent publication in French. And if they don't know that it's a well-known journal, well, they shouldn't be on the committee. People have to stop thinking that if it's published in English, that it means it's better. So we need people who understand anthropology, sociology, people who understand what the reputable publications are in France or in Quebec, like Recherche Amérindienne. It's a great publication, but it's in French. So organizations who are and committees need to know this because it's a evaluation by your peers. And if your colleagues don't know this information, well, you won't be evaluated the same way because of their ignorance.
Another question for you because time is flying by, but should there be incentives in criteria from the granting councils to include research in French? Now, we agree in some areas in publication in French. Should that be considered? Now, I draw a parallel with funding. Should there be representative funding for French content? Answer, well, I don't believe in that. Science is based on peer review and excellence. We just have to ensure that the peers have the tools they need to do the evaluations. The language of the publication is the choice of the researcher. When I worked on Einstein, I wrote in English. When I wrote on Victorin, I wrote in French because the audience isn't the same, the target audience. When I work on electrons, the audience is everyone, the Chinese, the Japanese, etc. Now, someone talked about synthesis reviews. There was a review in the 90s called Synthèse Science, and that was a failure. It flopped. Well, in addition to the impact factors, are there other factors that are causing a reduction in publication in French in social sciences? No. In social sciences, it's the internationalization that is confused with the language of use. And now I gave you the example of France, and people will say, oh, well, it's published in English in the United States. It must be better than what's written in French. But on the contrary, if there are things that are written in English that can be false, they're published abroad, people will have the false impression that they're better. But any other suggestions for us then with respect to ensuring that there is a Francophone presence in research and scientific publication? Well, you say publication. I say that the issue has been resolved, but for teaching. Teachers and professors hired must teach in French. Otherwise, we're encouraging students to go somewhere else. That's a false representation. If someone registers in a French university but has to take a physics class in English, well, that's false representation. Well, there's potential for us to transmit scientific knowledge, to pass it on in French. What do you think about that? Well, if you look at science in reviews, now I've published in French reviews and Quebec reviews, journals, etc. And when we look at what people are doing, it's important, but we need to modify the assessment and evaluation rules. Researchers can have an international audience and network. And well, thank you very much.
And thank you to Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca. It's now my honor to say thank you to you both. Thank you for coming tonight. I think everyone really appreciated your very interesting testimony. I hope it's been a good experience for you both. I hope that you will want to come back. We thank you very much. And dear colleagues, with that, we are going to suspend while we get ready for our third and last panel. Suspended. Meeting back to order. We are on our last panel of the evening. I would like to thank our witnesses. It is very gracious to come to share your expertise, to come on Halloween. And I'll just say a few words. J'aimerais faire quelques observations.
And I'd like to make some comments before we start. Before you speak, please wait for me to call your name. If you're participating by video conference, please click on the microphone icon to activate your microphone. And please mute yourself when you're not speaking. As regards interpretation, for those of you on Zoom, you have a choice at the bottom of your screen between floor, English, or French. For those of you in the room, you can use the earpiece and choose the channel you want. I'd like to remind you that all comments from members and witnesses should be directed to the chair.
We are very fortunate tonight to have from the Department of Industry, Innovation, Science, Economic Development, Dr. Nipun Vats, the Assistant Deputy Minister, Science and Research Sector. And from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, we have Valérie Latraverse, Vice President, Corporate Affairs. We'd like to welcome you both. You will each have 5 minutes to present. At the 4.5-minute mark, I will hold up this pink card so you know you have 30 seconds, and we aim to be fair to everyone. And with that, Dr. Vats,
Madame la Présidente.
Look forward to your, Monsieur Blanchet.
Mr. Blanchet-Jonca, yes, with your agreement, I'd like to ask if we can extend the meeting to take into account the time that we lost because of the technical problems. Can we take an extra 10 or 15 minutes where we had to suspend the meeting because of the technical problems? Can we extend by that amount of time?
I will check with our clerk, Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca, but I believe we do have to finish at 9:30, but I will check with our clerk. It's my understanding we can extend. Would 10 minutes be appropriate, Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca?
Allons-y, Madame la Présidente, avec 10 minutes. Merci.
Yes, thank you very much. 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who will be gracious in giving their time. So we will begin with Dr. Vats for 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair, et merci, membres du comité. Je suis heureux de revenir aujourd'hui.
Thank you, Madam Chair, this evening, and I'd like to tell you that I'm accompanied by Valérie Latraverse. I know that the committee has already heard from the other research councils, granting councils, and we work in close cooperation with the granting councils on this subject and many others, in fact. So I'd like to start by giving you a brief overview of research in Canada before we move on to research and publication in French.
Ingredients needed to thrive, and to support and protect Canadian research and science, the government has made total investments since 2016 of more than $14 billion. These investments are helping to cement Canada's position as a world leader in research and innovation and are building a global brand that will attract talent and capital for years to come. Our workforce is one of the most educated in the world. We have world-class research institutions from which 500,000 students graduate each year, and that places us as the highest share of university or college graduates among OECD countries. And we should also be proud of our scientific community. Despite representing just 0.5% of the global population, Canada generates more than 4% of global knowledge. World-class research is made possible through domestic and international partnerships, including collaborations between researchers, companies, and research institutions. We're committed to preserving a collaborative and open approach to science and discovery, while at the same time protecting Canadian research and intellectual property against foreign interference, espionage, and theft. To help ensure that investments in innovation, science, and research maximize benefits to Canadians, the government's 2022 budget also provided funding for the implementation of the National Security Guidelines for Research Partnerships. In sum, there are a range of building blocks necessary to build a strong economy and secure collaborative research system. En ce qui concerne le sujet de cette réunion,
With respect to scientific publications in French, the topic of this meeting, it's critical that we ensure equitable treatment of both of our official languages in order to enable the full breadth of research excellence in Canada's post-secondary institutions to shine. At ICED, and at the research funding agencies in the portfolio, the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, NSERC, and Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, SSHRC, we ensure our programs align with the government's objectives in key areas, including promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion, and ensuring alignment with policies and legislation that govern official languages and scientific publications. While ICED does not directly fund or coordinate any scientific publications, the department provides funding through contribution agreements with independent third-party organizations involved in funding and conducting research and training, and in the promotion of science. These contribution agreements require the recipient organization to provide its communications and services in both official languages and help to ensure alignment with Government of Canada policies and obligations under the Official Languages Act. Also within ICED, the Communications Research Centre, CRC, regularly publishes its research findings in online academic journals as the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers in Springer.
Regularly publishes its research findings in online academic journals, such as the IEEE, or Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and Springer. The CRC website provides a link to these journal articles found on a third-party website along with abstracts. Along with this, the CRC ensures that the abstracts on the CRC website are available in both English and French. In addition to research publications, the CRC also has research-related stories and videos in both English and French on its website. En tant que principal bailleur de fonds de la recherche,
as the main funding body of academic research and training, the granting councils adhere to the relevant policies and legislation that govern official languages and publications. They have the systems, processes, personnel, and capacity to thoroughly assess the scientific merit of an application, regardless of whether it's written in English or French.
You already heard from my colleague, Marc Fortin, from NSERC about the success of French applications for NSERC competitions. I think Valérie will speak a bit to SSHRC's core programs, which had similar or better success rates than applications submitted in English for talent grants, insight grants, and partnership grants. Now, just in the interest of time, Madam Chair, I'm wondering how much time is left.
Dr. Vatz, I'm sorry, that is the time, but I know the committee is keen to ask questions, and hopefully you'll be able to get more testimony shared with them then. Thank you, Dr. Vatz. And now we will go to Madame Latraverse for 5 minutes, please.
Bonsoir tout le monde.
Good evening. I'm Valérie Latraverse, Vice President, Corporate Affairs at the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, known as SSHRC. I'm responsible for policy, strategy, performance, evaluation, audit, and international relations at SSHRC. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about SSHRC's efforts to support French language research and publishing. Thank you as well for your leadership on research and science in Canada. As many of you know, SSHRC is the federal research funding agency that promotes and supports research and research training in the social sciences and humanities in Canada. SSHRC also administers interagency programs on behalf of the 3 federal research funding agencies, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, and SSHRC. These interagency programs include, amongst others, the Canada Research Chairs Program, the Canada First Research Excellence Fund, and the New Frontiers in Research Fund.
Humanities research is helping address some of the most critical challenges we face as a society, domestically and globally, be it pandemic recovery, economic growth, environmental sustainability, affordable housing, or reconciliation. Fundamentally, it's about building and sustaining a just and prosperous society. Le CRSH
SSHRC has a keen interest in supporting Canadian research in both official languages. Given that it's a federal entity, SSHRC must, of course, comply with Canada's official languages legislation, but it is much more than an obligation, as SSHRC is committed to increasing the impact of Canadian social sciences and humanities research conducted and published in French. It is indeed essential to connect with and capitalize on the wealth of ideas and knowledge produced in French to increase the pool of solutions to pressing global issues that concern us all. As you know, research and scholarship are increasingly interdisciplinary and collaborative, both here and abroad. This is why it is so important that SSHRC-funded researchers be able to participate fully in international collaborations in both English and French.
In the global context, linguistic duality is an asset for Canada and for the Canadian research system. It allows SSHRC, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, to assess and to fund research and research training in both official languages, strengthening the research enterprise, opening larger horizons, and increasing solutions that contribute to building the Canada and the world we want for today and tomorrow. And looking more regionally within Canada, we see how important it is for official language minority communities to have access to a local or regional post-secondary institution operating in the minority language. For Francophone communities outside Quebec, we realize how these institutions, often small in size, have a huge impact on the vitality of the community as an employer, for education and skills development, for local innovation, and as a community hub. SSHRC is pleased to support these communities, both through institutional grants, as well as individual grants for research, research training, and knowledge mobilization.
I've been working in the public service for over 20 years, and I'm truly impressed by the strength of SSHRC's workforce, which is very bilingual, as well as by the organizational culture, which is also very bilingual. Thanks to this, our activities are thought out in both languages and take into account linguistic duality. In conclusion, at SSHRC, we are always looking for international best practices and challenges facing the Francophone research community in Canada to ensure greater equity in the funding and dissemination of research in French. Thank you.
Both our witnesses, we're really grateful for your time this evening, and I believe tonight we're beginning with Mr. Major for 6 minutes, please. The floor is yours.
You can turn that on? I guess I'll do that. Thank you, Chair. This question is for Madame LeChaverse. Canada is not the only bilingual country in the world. there are many countries that have even more official languages than Canada. Has there been any research or analysis on how these countries have dealt with this matter?
We fund, can you hear me? I'm hearing an echo. I apologize.
There you go.
I don't have the evidence in front of me, but we do fund quite a bit of research at SSHRC focused on the French language and bilingualism. So we'd be happy to share some of the research that we funded on that topic. It's actually really important for us as well to connect internationally to those communities that have a bilingual nature as well. So yes, we do fund research of that nature, and I'm happy to follow up with some specific examples.
Yes, if you could provide the committee with that research, that'd be fantastic. And is there a language being used as an international language for publications around the world?
I would say English is the predominant language in the social sciences and humanities, yes.
Okay, thank you. Do you think Canada is on track to become a destination of choice for Francophone researchers and post-secondary students?
I mean, I would absolutely say so, and I would say that the bilingualism of our country is an asset. When we, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I'm responsible for international relations. And when we do meet with international counterparts, such as Switzerland, France, we recently met with the Wallonie region in Belgium. Canada is definitely seen as a leader, not only in French language research, but as a bilingual country. So yes, I would say we're on track.
Excellent. Dr. Vats, do you think that the lack of publishing opportunities prevents innovative discoveries by Francophone researchers?
Well, I guess what I would say is I don't have any empirical evidence to that effect. I think that it's important that researchers be able to connect with one another as effectively as possible. And in some domains, the lingua franca of research is English. In others, it varies depending on the nature of the research. And so, that connectivity is actually what promotes innovation. So I think that having that ability in Canada to move across two languages actually just sort of strengthens our ability to explore domains of research that may otherwise be a little more challenging to access.
Thank you. Madame Latraverse, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I do not.
Okay, and the next question is for you. In your experience, do French and English publications receive the same amount of recognition? Or are there any advantages associated with Anglophone publications and research?
I have to say I have a short-lived experience in this, so I'll defer the question to my colleague. I joined SSHRC in a year ago, and I've worked with the scientific community across all disciplines, but I couldn't say that I have a particular opinion on that question.
You've never noticed a difference between French or English publications as far as the acceptance of them?
Well, I would think, could you repeat the question?
So, in your experience, do French and English publications receive the same amount of recognition? Are there any advantages associated with Anglophone publications and research?
I mean, I would say that if you're in a French community and you are and you're published in a certain publication, you would have probably the same, I guess, respect as if you're an Anglophone publishing in a well-known publication in English. So I wouldn't see any difference. I think it just depends on the community in which you operate and in which you publish.
Excellent. Thank you. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mazur, and we're so glad you've joined us. Welcome. And with that, we will go to Mr. Collins for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks for the witnesses for attending this evening. Dr. Vats, we've heard from many witnesses through the study that there's a whole host of supports for French research, obviously in the province of Quebec, and that should come as no surprise to anyone. But we also know, and we've heard, that there is French research that is conducted outside of the province, and there can be challenges and barriers faced by individual researchers or organizations that are looking to support French publications. And so, do you have any recommendations as to how the government can assist and supplement maybe provincial and or post-secondary programs that might exist outside the province of Quebec?
Thank you for the question. I mean, I guess at a very basic level, the publication costs for those journals that actually require you to pay for publication costs are an eligible expense under grants from the granting councils. So there is that level of support. I think the other thing is that when it comes to peer review processes for grant awards, I think there is a really strong attempt to ensure that there is a level playing field between the two languages, and that's borne out by some of the statistics around the success rates. Although granted, a smaller proportion, I think, generally of Francophone researchers actually submit their applications in French than would be the case if you were going by population share. So there may be something to look at in that. Outside of the province of Quebec, I mean, there are institutions that are either bilingual or have are francophone in nature, and they provide supports to their researchers. And then beyond that, there are other opportunities for publication, like open access types of publications, and that allow for publications to be provided in either official language that also are an effective way of disseminating materials. So I think there are a range of supports. I don't think there's a single kind of magic solution to the problem. But I think when it comes to the actual sort of financial support that's provided through federal government programming, the efforts are to try and ensure that merit is not it does not sort of discount one language versus the other.
Okay, thank you for that. Just as a supplemental, from previous witness testimony, I think we heard. First, I'll go to what you submitted earlier. You talked about requiring organizations to conform with the policies under the Official Languages Act. You've talked about a level playing field just now, and you've used other language that talks about ensure equitable treatment of both languages. And I think some of the witnesses we've heard today have talked about challenges and barriers that they face when submitting grant applications. And so I guess I would ask you, in the context of those constructive criticism I think that the committee's heard, what inroads, what changes have been made over the last number of years to create the environment, I think, that you opened with as it relates to creating that level playing field? There seems to be some disagreement from those who are submitting grants that it may not be level today as we speak and we undertake this study. What would you argue in defense in terms of changes that have been made over the years that try to create the environment that you've presented here this evening?
Well, I mean, I guess there, like the one sort of important change that's happened is that assessment boards are trained in issues related to systemic bias. So I think that there is, much more than say 10 years ago, there is a level of understanding and a required training in the case of many boards, and certainly in all of the governance committees at the councils, that require you to understand how you can bring your biases to the table, which may be with respect to gender, race, linguistic issues that try and get over those types of issues. I think the other part of it is that in terms of recruitment, I don't have the statistics, sort of a time series of statistics on recruitment when it comes to reviewers of grant applications, but certainly today the share of reviewers on review committees for grant applications, it is either generally speaking either meets or exceeds the share of applications, and in fact I think in many cases it's about a quarter, so it's sort of representative of the population. And in so doing, you're ensuring that when you have a sort of a peer review committee that's assessing the quality of an application, that there is a significant fraction of the reviewers that are equipped to review it in that language, which means that applications in either official language are getting sort of a fair shake, if you will.
Okay, thanks. Supplemental to that, if I could, Madam Chair, if I have time. Dr. Vats, on EDI training then, is it mandatory for those that are reviewing the applications? Is it policy that anyone who's in receipt of a grant application and is reviewing those applications is to undertake EDI training to get at that systemic bias prior to going through that process, or is it optional for those people who?
Well, I would defer to the councils to confirm this, but I know that certainly for the governance committees that review the integrity of the processes, it is required, and I can say that with authority because I'm on some of those committees. I know that at least in the case of some of the large programs with large awards, there's not only systemic bias training, but there are often subcommittees of the peer review committee that are actually focused on issues of equity, and so there are multiple layers to this. But when it comes to whether it's required across the board for all review committees, I think that's something I'd have to turn to my colleagues at the councils to confirm.
Thank you very much, Mr. Collins, and to our witnesses. Again, we are grateful for your being here. We will now go to Monsieur Blanchet-Chancaf pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to salute the witnesses that are here for the third hour. Mr. Vats, does your department recognize that there is less and less publication in French right now in Canada? You're saying that they are falling swiftly? Can you define this? I don't know what you mean exactly. There's a decreased. There are less and less publications in French. I'm sorry, I have not seen those numbers. I don't know. I am not aware of a decline in French language publications. Could your department give us an answer later? Thank you. I will share some data with you since you don't appear to be aware of them. Between 1980 and 2014, there was a decline of 25% in French language publications for medical and natural sciences. And there's also been a decline for humanities and social sciences, about 20%, if you look at the 40 last years. You talked about a fair treatment for both official languages. What data do you have on funding that is given? Is it proportional? Is it 50-50 between French and English? Well, I have a few statistics that I would be able to share. I have them somewhere here, not quite. I don't have access right now. I don't know if Valerie has them. Mr. Vats, I'd just like to know, have you noticed a trend? Do you know if there is a equitable funding right now between English and French for scientific research in Canada? I think so. I think that the level of success or success rates for French language applications are more or less equal, and in certain cases they might even get better results than English language applications, but it depends on the number of applications that are put forward in both official languages. It is possible that the amount of applications is exactly that's what we're saying. The success rate is not a datum that can be used because the percentage of requests is practically inexistent in certain granting commissions. For example, at NSERC, only 10% of submissions are in French. What is your department doing to fight against this decline? Would you allow me to answer in English? I'm very sorry about this, but it will allow me to express myself a little bit better. I manage better in English on this type of topic, so I will answer in English.
I think that the language of publication or the language of application, it's somewhat reflective of the language of work in a discipline as well, I think. So, I think that I would like to hope, although I don't have evidence to this effect, that applicants who are Francophone are if they choose to apply in English, it's reflective of the fact that their work environment when it comes to communication of scientific knowledge is more in English than it is in French, which may be the nature of certain disciplines of research. But to be honest, I don't have enough detailed data to be able to validate that. But I can certainly say that when it comes to the natural science and engineering disciplines, the vast majority of research communication is done in English, and it may be the case that influences the choice of language in the application itself. But again, that is not based on analysis.
Merci, Monsieur Vatz. Je vais tenter de vous demander.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vatz. I'll try to ask more specific questions, and then you can share more data with us. I'd like to come back to funding requests. I'd like to know, is there an unbalance between the proportion of amounts given for both official languages? I'm not talking about success levels, but amounts of money that have been given over the last 20 years. That's my first question for you. Now, the part of funding that is given to Francophone versus Anglophone universities, not just in Quebec, but also in English language minority universities. I'd like to have an answer from your university. And I come back with the example from NSERC. 50% of Francophones in Canada submit their grant proposal in English. Is this something that your department has noticed? What measures and mechanisms have been put in place to encourage Francophones to submit grant proposals in French and to do research and publication in the official language of their choice?
I think that our colleagues at NSERC and SSHRC would be well positioned to provide. I don't know if you have the full time series of data, but they would be well placed to provide that. The ministry itself doesn't actually hold that information, so it would be with the councils. But to the extent I don't want to speak for my colleague, but I think that to the extent that it's available, I think they would be able to share that. Your question in terms of the actions to support applications in both official languages, I think that the councils have made a real effort to ensure that when it comes to peer review, that there is a representation, linguistic representation on review committees that tries to ensure that the assessment is equitable in both languages. Whether that needs to be better communicated is another question, to ensure that people are not choosing to apply in English or in English because of a concern that is not the case.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Thank you, Mr. Blanchet-Jonca. And again, I thank our witnesses who are so gracious with their time. And now we will go to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you to both the witnesses. I just want to follow up on some of the questions Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca was asking, perhaps with Ms. Latraverse of SSHRC. We've heard from NSERC, Monsieur Fortin gave us the example that I think it was 26% of applicants were Francophone, but only 10% of the applications were in French. But he gave some data from, I think it was just restricted to McGill and University of Ottawa, that the French applications there had greater success than the English applications for NSERC. I'm just wondering if SSHRC has similar data, and maybe you're not aware of the exact numbers today, but if we could perhaps get a written answer in the near future from SSHRC of those data. What is the proportion of applications to SSHRC from Francophones? How many are presented in French and how many are in English proportionately? And the success rate of those different applications, French versus English. Is that something we could get for the committee?
Yeah, no, and absolutely. And I could tell you for the last 10 years, the application rates of application rates in French for all our programs ranges from 15 to 19%. And it really depends on the particular program or financing opportunity. And those numbers have been quite steady over the last 10 years. In terms of the award rate for applications in French, again, we've seen that they've been quite steady, and they range from 14% to 26%, again, depending on the funding opportunity. So we tend to have a higher award rate for our partnerships programs, but that could be, due to a number of factors. But all that to say, quite steady over the last 10 years. So we haven't really seen a lot of dips or any free falling, as was referred to earlier. I would also say in the year 21 to 22, and I'd invite, and I'm happy to provide you with our report on competitions, but we actually saw a higher success rate in the aggregate among French applicants last year. So again, we do an evaluation and a review and a report every year on all our competitions, broken down by funding opportunity, programs, by language, by French language. So I think you'd find that quite interesting.
And you also mentioned some of the cross, I forget, I don't know what the term would be, but the initiatives like Canada Research Chairs and New Frontiers that were shared among the councils. Can you perhaps comment on the issues of, say, a Francophone applying for those positions or funding for those projects? What the processes are to make sure that that process is fair?
Well, I would say that we have a number of measures because outside of Quebec, because a lot of the Francophone institutions tend to be smaller institutions, we have a number of measures put in place to ensure equity. And so we have an institutional supplements to the an institutional grant that universities receive. We also have a method of calculation under a research support fund, which is the fund for all indirect costs. Is there's a formula that is actually favorable for smaller institutions. So smaller institutions would get a higher percentage of their indirect costs funded through the I'm mixing it up in French, Research Support Fund. And then we also have an allocation of chairs reserved for small institutions across Canada through the Canada Research Chairs programs. So just to give you an example, there are 10 institutions, French language minority institutions across Canada that have Canada Research Chairs. And there are 66 active Canada Research Chairs in those 10 institutions. And then we also have 6 special Canada Research Chairs that are really targeted to those small institutions. And the total investment for those chairs in those institutions, again, for French language minority institutions, is $62 million.
Well, thank you. And Madam Chair, I think I'll cede the rest of my time if there is any.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cannings. And with that, I believe we're going to go, I'll just confirm this with the Conservative Party. Are we going to go back to Monsieur Blanchette-Jonca?
Correct.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tucker. So, Monsieur Blanchette-Jonca, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Vatz, in November 2021, the government of Quebec announced that they would fund the implementation of research funding. It was a recommendation done by ACFAS. It would have been a service available for francophones throughout Canada. The request was sent to the federal government. Will the federal government fund to this service for aid of research in French?
Commitment to do so.
Est-ce que ce serait possible d'obtenir une réponse de votre ministère?
Could we get an answer from your department, Mr. Vance?
I will say that we have provided support to ACFAS activities, but with respect to that specific initiative, I don't have that information.
Merci beaucoup. Concrètement, Monsieur Vatz.
Thank you very much. Several witnesses that we've heard during the last meetings of this committee have made specific recommendations in order to stop the decline of the French language in research and publications in Canada. Has your department ever considered the implementation of some measures in order to promote research and publications in French?
We've looked at specific measures in that regard. I think we've focused a lot on the range of issues around ensuring equitable review. We're not, we generally, except through the grants that are provided through the councils, don't actually fund publication in either language. Either official language, so we don't normally have such a policy. Madame Latraverse might have specifics on whether there are any such programs within SSHRC, but as a general policy, we don't have any sort of specific funding for.
Pour bien comprendre, Monsieur Vatz, est-ce qu'il
If I understand well, Mr. Vatz, are there selection criteria in your funding that would help French have more space in French language research and publication in Canada?
Specific to that effect.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask my following questions to Ms. Latraverse. I've familiarized myself with your resume. You've developed an international expertise with Global Affairs Canada. With regard to your experience, how would you evaluate the role that Canada can play as a scientific leader in the francophonie at an international level? Well, I think that we have a great opportunity to show leadership in the francophonie. As I've mentioned previously, the fact that we are a bilingual country with a francophone scientific powerhouse, if you will, I think it gives us a lot of opportunities to collaborate. We are developing an approach on the international level. And as I've mentioned previously, we are in discussions right now with Switzerland, Belgium, France, and we are working on collaboration with African countries as well. I'm really sorry, Ms. Latraverse, I'll have to interrupt you because time is really flying by. You say you're working on an approach. Does that mean that there's currently no approach? There's no strategy right now in order to increase dissemination of the French language internationally as a science language? Well, there might be a strategy with Global Affairs Canada, where I worked previously. We are very active in working with countries from the francophonie, but within SSHRC, well, we've always worked in close collaboration with France. But is there a strategic plan? That was my question. Is there a strategic plan within the department, within ISED? I am not aware of a specific strategy, no. Do you think you could give us an answer from the department, a more detailed answer later? I'd also like to know, Ms. Latraverse, I've shared data previously coming from the chairs of research in Canada on transformation of publications, saying that between that there has been a decrease of 25% of French language publications when it comes to social sciences. Do you not think that this is a free fall, or do you think it's just natural fluctuations? I'm really sorry. I'd have to have these numbers before me. But we do support the program to help with scientific publications. We have different partnerships here at SSHRC. We work with different organizations. I've talked about this in my opening remarks. I wasn't quite aware of a free fall in the numbers because we do everything that we can to support aid to publications in French in Canada. Thank you very much, Ms. Latraverse.
Jean-Ca, again, thank you to our witnesses. We will now go to Ms. Diab for 5 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and welcome to both of our witnesses. Very interesting panel, and thank you very much for being there. I was very interested to hear from you, Madame Latraverse, when you spoke about, because one of my questions was, what about institutions outside Quebec that are francophone in a French language minority setting? For example, Université Sainte-Anne in Nova Scotia. And you were, you were sort of, I wanted to speak to you about the challenges that researchers there have, as well as the institutions themselves. I wanted to ask what, if anything, your organization does to sort of help those researchers and those institutions.
Well, as I mentioned, we do have supplements. We have institutional grants to universities, and we have supplements for universities, smaller universities, which tend to be the francophone universities that you're speaking about. And we also, through our research support fund, as I mentioned earlier, have a calculation in which we provide potentially a higher proportion of indirect costs to those institutions. I might add that those institutional grants, they can be used to support research activities in those universities, and that could be used, the university could choose to use that institutional grant, the funds, to promote French language research in their institution. I would also say that we're very active in terms of outreach. Our president visits these universities frequently, obviously not during COVID, but we are there, we go, we listen. We really, SSHRC as an organization, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, really believes in the bilingual character of our country. And so we make it a point of visiting those institutions to understand what their concerns might be. I would also add, which I didn't have an opportunity to say earlier, all of our, and Dr. Vatz referred to this earlier, 25% of our reviewers correspond in French in our merit review committees. So that's quite an important figure, I would say. And we also ask that all merit reviewers have bilingual capacity as well. So I hope that answers your question in terms of the support that we provide for those minority language institutions.
Yes, thank you very much.
Outside of Quebec.
And Mr. Vatz, I have a question. You started your discussion there by saying that the total investments the government has made since 2016 have been $14 billion. You also talked about the connection between researchers, companies, institutions, and government. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? And tell me, where do you see government playing a bigger role or an additional role in helping researchers publish in French vis-a-vis the institutions or even private enterprise for that matter?
Well, I mean, there are a number of layers to that. I guess at one level, a lot of what we're doing in addition to supporting investigator-led, inquiry-based research is also on the other end of it, trying to better connect the outputs of research to society, to the economy. And that's done through some of the programs that have been developed through the councils. It's done through some of the programs through ISED as well, which try and promote innovations moving from the lab to the marketplace. And that's true. And those sort of business supports are provided in both official languages. There's an effort to try and connect researchers across the country to companies across the country, wherever the strengths may be. And a lot of our programs try and take that national platform approach. I see that the chair has signaled time, but I don't know if I have the opportunity to finish the answer.
There's another 10 seconds, Dr. Vatz.
Well, I think it's to be, just as an observation, I think the more that you can actually connect knowledge, the knowledge mobilization in both official languages is very effective, right? If you can actually, and enhancing the connections between researchers who work in English and in French just means that there's a greater appreciation of the connections between what they do, and that those synergies actually do pay off. So I think
thank you, Dr. Vatz, and thank you, Ms. Diab. We will now go to Monsieur Blanchet-Jean-Cap for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je retourne vers vous, Monsieur Vatz. Écoutez.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vatz, some witnesses who've come before the committee have said that they lack confidence in the granting councils for applying in French. 5 to 12% of all applications come in French, but Francophone researchers represent 21% of the community. Are these things that you've noticed as part of within your council? Are these imbalances you've noted?
As for what the reason for that difference is, I don't think unfortunately, we don't have enough evidence to sort of assess what the cause is. I think there's actually better data now being collected in that regard with respect to, not only the language of the application, but the language, the language that the individual is applying identifies with, the official language they identify with. So I think we will get better data on this. It's hard to draw. The numbers on their face don't sound very good, but it's hard to draw conclusions without kind of digging more deeply into what the meaning of that is.
Merci, Monsieur Vatz. Donc, je comprends que c'est dur.
Well, Mr. Vatz, yes, it is hard to draw conclusions, but it's even harder to propose some solutions then. Could you share with us the percentage of applications in French compared to applications in English, in both languages then? For the granting councils, the 3 of them over the past 20 years, would it be possible to provide the committee with that information? Well, I don't know if it's available for the past 20 years, but I can ask my colleagues in the granting councils. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vatz. Another question for you. Funding for universities, English universities in Quebec has gone up. It's gone up significantly in the province. Anglophones represent 8% of the population. Have you seen that in your department? That is making scientific research more anglicized in the province? The fact that the official language in Quebec is French.
I don't have those statistics offhand. Just to clarify, is that the share of, according to those numbers, is that the share of research that's done in Anglophone institutions, or is that the share of research that's done in English?
Donc, c'est le financier.
Monsieur Blanchet-Jean-Cap, perhaps you'd like to ask for a written answer
Oui,
here?
je vais prendre une réponse écrite, Madame la.
Yes, please. I would like to ask for an answer in writing then, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Monsieur Blanchet-Jean-Cap. And for the last 2.5 minutes, and our witnesses have been so kind in staying this extra time, we will go to Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
Madam Chair, considering the late hour, I will simply pass on that and and say thank you to all.
Thank you, Mr. Cannings. That's very kind. I would like to thank our witnesses. It's a late night. You've been very kind with your time and your expertise. We hope you've had a pleasant time, that you'll want to come back again. I would like to thank our clerk, our analysts, our interpreters, and everyone who supports this committee and who has stayed late tonight.
Point of order.
Oh, and
Madam
I
Chair?
hear there's a point of order. Yes, Mr. Mazur?
Just before we dismiss for the night, through you, Chair, I would like to get an update on our digital binder for the next study on the Moonshot study. In particular, notice of motion needs to be posted and the witness list, please, if that could be updated. I guess the clerk would do
Thank you
that.
very much. Thank you, Mr. Mazur. I will pass it to our excellent clerk.
Thank you. Have a good night.
So just
Thank you.
to clarify for this, not
Mr. Clerk,
I think the room is getting up from the table, so.
Oh, okay. Okay, I see what Mr. Mazur was just asking for an update. With that, dear colleagues, I will say thank you to you all. Happy Halloween, adjourned.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.